Shalom lekulam. Hope you're doing well. Akiva here. Wanting to share some Torah on the way with you this week for this week's Torah portion, Vayikra, the first Torah portion in the new book, the third book of the Torah, Vayikra. Last week we finished the book of Shemot, as we mentioned, and I wanted to share a few words, a few thoughts on the very first verse of this week's Torah portion. It says so beautifully the words Vayikra el Moshe. Right? And God calls out to Moshe, Vayedaber Hashem elav, and God speaks with him, Me'ohel Moed, from the tent of meeting, basically the Mishkan Lemor, saying. So in this first verse of this first Parsha of this new book of the Torah, we have right away three different languages describing communication between God and Moshe. Right? And some level, some of the Torah commentators say just to show Hashem's desire for relationship with Moshe and through Moshe with all of Israel, right, which we'll build upon. Right now. Right? Specifically, I want to focus on this word Vayikra, that God calls out to Moshe. Right? God calls out to Moshe. And on this Rashi, the famous Torah commentator, says that Hakol holechu magia laznav, that the voice of God went out and reached the ears of Moshe. Imagine Moshe standing in the newly built Mishkan, which was finished. We learned about its finishing in last week's Torah portion, and now we're going to be learning more in this parsha, in the upcoming parshiot. But what happens in the Mishkan, and the sacrifices and the work of the Kohanim, right? So Moshe is standing in this newly built Mishkan, and hears the voice of God, right? But then Rashi says, "V'chol Yisrael lo shomin," that the rest of Israel didn't hear it. You could be standing right next to Moshe in the Mishkan. You could be standing a few feet away. It didn't matter. You wouldn't hear what Moshe was hearing. Moshe is hearing this divine communication loud and clear. You're sitting right next to him. You don't hear a thing. What's going on? Right? This communication was only meant for Moshe. Right? And of course, Moshe, we learned, is the highest prophet of Israel, of all the world, of all time. Right? So of course he's going to hear this, unique, beautiful communication from God. But I think it also comes to teach us that just like Moshe heard things from God towards him that nobody else can hear, so to us. Right? That us, from back then until today, including today, that emanating from God is all these words, is all these calling outs, is all this communication to each and every single one of us, and only we hear it. Only we can hear it. Right? What's meant for me is meant for me. I am the one who is meant to hear it, and only I can hear it. And you can't, and I can't hear what's meant for you, right? And it's this beautiful thing. It's this relationship. It's this communication. It's this desire for closeness, right, between us and God, from God specifically, right? This calling out. Last week we mentioned briefly that the previous book was called the Book of Shemot, the Book of Names. Right? After all these weeks of learning all these different stories of Israel, we're basically learning our name. What's my name? Who am I? And once I learn my name and once I learn who I am, I can be called out. Someone can call out my name and say, "Hey, Akiva," right? And God's calling that out all the time. The question is, do we hear it? Right? And if we want to hear it, so the question is, well, how do I hear it? So I think embedded in this first verse again is the answer to that question, because the very first word is Vayikra, calling out, ends with an aleph, and the aleph is small. It's smaller than all the other letters in the Torah. Right? There's a bunch of letters like that in the Torah. Some are big or some are small. In this case, the aleph is smaller. What's it coming to teach us? Right? That aleph is one. Just one. Small already. Right? But in this case, it's even written smaller. Right? To teach us humility. We learn about Moshe from the Torah that Moshe was the humblest of all people ever. Right? And we might think of someone who's really humble, it's they get stepped on, people take advantage of them, it's a whole joke. But no, humility doesn't have to mean weakness. Right? Humility is actually strength. Right? And through this humility, Moshe is able to achieve unbelievable spiritual heights, come so close, the closest of all human beings ever, right? To the divine Creator. Right? And we can learn from this as well that we want closest, we want to hear that communication. I want to hear God calling out, Akiva, this is for you. So I have to humble myself. I have to humble myself. It's the only way. Right? And when we genuinely humble ourselves, we create a vessel, we empty ourselves out, we create a vessel for God to fill us up, right, with God's words and God's closeness and God's calling out to us. So I want to bless you, I want to bless me, that this Shabbat, we should really take that and we should hear those words, Vayikra El Moshe, right? And hear our name in there as well, right? That God's calling out to us all the time. We should be zoche, we should merit to hear that calling out. Right? Those beautiful words, that beautiful song that's happening all the time, all around. Lots of love. Shabbat Shalom from the land of Israel. All the best. Shabbat Shalom.